Jasmine Crockett, senior White House advisor, was denied a room at Magnolia Grand, the very hotel her husband founded. Just 5 minutes later, Victor arrived and turned the entire situation upside down. What seemed like a minor slight triggered a sweeping reform across the entire hotel chain overnight. If your partner was cast aside because of their political beliefs, would you stay silent or change the whole system? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The sun was starting to set over Austin when Jasmine Crockett stepped out of her black Rolls-Royce in front of the Magnolia Grand. She had just finished a long, exhausting week in Washington, full of tense meetings, press battles, and political pressure. This hotel, built by her husband Victor Steele, was meant to be her safe place. But Jasmine didn't want attention. She booked her room under her mother's name, Laverne, Washington, hoping to rest without being noticed. No interviews, no cameras, just peace. But just as Jasmine stepped into the glow of the Magnolia Grand's grand lobby, something felt wrong, like a note off key in a familiar song. The space looked the same. Soaring ceilings, golden light washing over white marble floors, the soft hum of jazz trickling from hidden speakers. But the air had changed. There was tension beneath the polish, something unspoken but sharp. Jasmine walked toward the front desk like she owned the place, because in a way she did. Her husband, Victor Steele, had built this empire brick by brick. She wasn't just another guest. She was family, legacy. And yet, the moment she locked eyes with the woman behind the counter, she could already sense the shift from welcome to warning. Sloan stood behind the desk like a gatekeeper, not a hostess. Early 20s, lavender-dyed buzz cut, eyebrow piercing, matte black nails tapping the keyboard in slow, deliberate rhythm. Her face was polite but unreadable, except for the slight curl at the corner of her lips, the kind that said, "I know who you are, and I've already made up my mind." She didn't even say hello. Jasmine, composed and cordial, spoke first. "I have a reservation, Laverne, Washington." She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just gave the name and waited. Sloane's eyes flicked to her screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then nothing. A long pause. She tapped a few keys without urgency, then looked up with a practiced, condescending smile. "I'm sorry, that name's not coming up in our system." Jasmine, still calm, pulled out her phone. "I have the confirmation email right here," she said, holding it out. Sloane didn't look at it. She didn't even lean forward. Instead, she crossed her arms, her voice light but laced with passive defiance. "Sometimes the system's delayed. You know, syncing issues." A shrug. "Also, we have certain expectations for our guests. We're a very values-driven space." Jasmine stared at her. "What expectations exactly?" she asked, voice low and tight. Sloane's smile widened just enough to feel insulting. "Progressive values, equity, environmental awareness, respect for marginalized voices. You know, the usual. We try to make sure this space stays aligned with those ideals." Jasmine blinked slowly. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't a glitch. This was judgment. It was deliberate, calculated. A soft, sanitized rejection wrapped in buzzwords and fake politeness. Jasmine had faced public attacks in front of national cameras. But this was personal. A young receptionist who thought she had the moral high ground, looking down her nose at a senior White House advisor in the very hotel built by Jasmine's own husband. And Jasmine wasn't just being denied a room. She was being disrespected, erased, right where she should have been untouchable. Sloane had drawn a line, and without raising her voice, without saying Jasmine's name, she'd already fired the first shot. Jasmine said nothing at first. She simply unlocked her phone, her movements smooth and practiced, the way one might draw a weapon in a standoff, quiet, deliberate, with intent. She scrolled once and held up the screen. "Here's the confirmation," she said, her voice firm but measured. "Suite 1503, booked this afternoon, 3:42 p.m. Name on the reservation, Laverne, Washington, that's me." The email was crisp, professional, complete with a reservation code, a barcode, and the Magnolia Grand signature at the bottom. Everything was in order. It was not a request. It was not open to interpretation. It was a fact. Sloane leaned forward, not to read the screen, but just enough to perform curiosity. Her eyes barely flicked over the phone. She didn't take the device, didn't cross-check anything. Interesting, she said, drawing the word out like it meant nothing at all. We haven't had issues with the system today, but sometimes it misfires. Technology, you know. She gave a smile that was all lips, no warmth. Then, without touching the keyboard, she took a small step back, folding her arms tightly across her chest. Either way, she continued, we're very intentional about who we accommodate here. There's more to hospitality than just clicking book now. Jasmine blinked slowly. Her eyes were sharp, but her tone stayed cool. Is that right? She asked. So what exactly am I being disqualified for? Being too prompt, too polite, or too quiet? Her words didn't rise, but they landed like iron. Sloane smiled again, wider this time, but not kinder. We aim for a certain kind of energy here, she said vaguely. We curate the space. There are expectations. We want guests who align with our mission. Inclusion, awareness, social harmony. People who walk the talk, you know? Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable steel thread of judgment underneath it, wrapped in pretty words but sharp enough to cut. Jasmine stared at her for a long moment. She wasn't confused. She was calculating. This wasn't about a glitch. It wasn't about a double booking or a miscommunication. No, this was something far more intentional. The email had been seen. The facts had been presented. Yet the gate was still closed. She wasn't being turned away because the room wasn't available. She was being turned away because she wasn't. No screaming, no confrontation, just a subtle wall, built brick by brick from passive-aggressive phrases and moral superiority. Jasmine had seen politics dressed in velvet gloves before, but never like this. Not here, not in her husband's hotel, and never with a smile so carefully trained to look harmless. As she stood there in her own husband's hotel, holding undeniable proof of her reservation, while being calmly, politely erased, a reel of memory began playing in her mind. Not memories of speeches or press briefings, but of quiet injustices, ones people don't always see unless they've lived through them. She thought of Marcus Langston, a close friend and fellow DC survivor, a former Marine, decorated, disciplined, and proud. He drove a black Rolls-Royce, not because he was flashy, but because he earned it. One summer afternoon, he pulled into a gas station in suburban Virginia, wearing a navy blue America First t-shirt. Not a slur, not a threat, just 3 words. But it was enough to make the cashier tell him, you need to take that off or take your business elsewhere. No discussion, no service, just a look of fear disguised as moral high ground. Jasmine remembered how stunned Marcus had been, not angry, just broken. I fought for this country, he told her later, and now I scare people at a gas pump. And then there was Dr. Elaine Wu, a tenured professor at a liberal arts college in upstate New York. Elaine had written a keynote about the importance of intellectual humility, about how freedom of speech didn't mean agreement, and how discomfort wasn't danger. 20 minutes before her talk, a student organizer pulled her aside. The message was clear. Some students feel unsafe with this topic. We're replacing your segment with a mindfulness session. Elaine didn't scream. She simply packed up her notes and left the stage in silence. Jasmine never forgot the look on her face that night, like someone who realized the rules had changed and no one told her. These weren't accidents. They were warnings. And now, standing in front of a smiling receptionist who refused to even look at her confirmation email, Jasmine realized she wasn't the exception. She was just next. This wasn't about her booking. It wasn't even about this hotel. It was part of a wider script, playing out across the country in soft tones and polished language. A quiet revolution where virtue replaced fairness and where being unapproved, by a stranger's standard, meant you no longer belonged. This wasn't hospitality. This was ideology in uniform. And for the first time that day, Jasmine felt not just excluded, but deeply, deliberately targeted. She gripped her phone just a little tighter. The weight in her chest wasn't shock anymore. It was understanding. This wasn't a system glitch. It was the system working exactly as designed. And suddenly, this wasn't about getting her room. This was about drawing a line in the marble. He walked across the lobby with the measured calm of a trained negotiator, walking into a closed-door meeting. Her heels struck the marble floor in slow, deliberate beats. Her expression was neutral, but beneath it, her mind had already gone surgical. She didn't need to yell. She needed the truth, and she knew exactly where to find it. She slipped around a corner near the concierge desk, back to the wall, screen already lighting up in her palm. She scrolled quickly, bypassing dozens of contacts until she reached one marked only. Luis R., Internal Ops, Trusted. Her thumb hovered for half a second, then tapped. The line rang once. "Ms. Crockett?" a voice answered, crisp and a little breathless. Luis Reyes had always been efficient. Quiet, too. Years ago, he'd nearly lost his job after being wrongly implicated in a security breach tied to political campaign records. They'd pinned it on him because he didn't talk much, and because they thought no one would defend him. But Jasmine had. She read the audit logs herself. She cleared his name. No press, no favors, just the truth. From that day forward, Luis had treated her name like a password to action. "I need access logs," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Front desk terminal. Guest name was entered as Laverne Washington. I need to know if that record existed, and who deleted it." Luis didn't hesitate. "Give me 5 minutes," he replied. "You have 4, Jasmine said, then ended the call. She stepped out of the shadows and leaned against a marble pillar near the center of the lobby, eyes watching everything while pretending to watch nothing. Sloan was still at the desk, playing with the keyboard like a pianist who didn't know the song. Behind her, another employee handed out room cards to a couple in yoga wear. No urgency, no tension, like nothing had happened. Like a woman hadn't just been denied service in her husband's own hotel for no reason other than political prejudice wrapped in smiles. Jasmine's screen buzzed. A message. Her heart didn't skip, but her pulse sharpened, honed like the edge of a blade. She tapped to open it. A screenshot appeared, then another. And with them, the entire truth laid bare in black and white. Reservation confirmed. Guest Laverne Washington, Suite, 1503. Time 3:42 p.m. Confirmed via web, system ID, number MGX-7ALF. Then, 2 entries that flipped the atmosphere around her from merely unjust to undeniably criminal. 5:04 p.m. User Sloan.h searches Jasmine Crockett biography. 5:07 p.m. Manual cancellation of reservation MGX-7ALF by user Sloan.h. No reason provided. Jasmine stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Her chest was still, but every cell in her body was now coiled. This wasn't a suspicion. This wasn't a gut feeling. This was irrefutable evidence. Sloan hadn't made a mistake. She had identified Jasmine, Googled her, confirmed who she was, and then used her login credentials to erase her from the system. Jasmine took a deep breath. Her hands moved fast and exact. Screenshots saved to secure folder, backed up to a separate device, and mirrored to a hidden email she only used for sensitive materials. She copied the text logs into a file titled System Tamper Sloan H and uploaded that to the encrypted cloud. Then she paused, one long breath in, one breath out, before sliding her phone into her clutch. Her expression didn't change, but her entire presence did. She wasn't just Jasmine Crockett, a woman looking for a hotel room. She was now Jasmine Crockett, senior White House advisor, with documented proof that a front desk employee at her husband's hotel had targeted her politically and tried to erase her without a trace. And as she turned and walked back toward that desk, each step calm, precise, unrelenting, the lobby didn't know yet that it was seconds away from becoming a courtroom. Her courtroom. Sloan was still smiling when Jasmine returned. But this time, Jasmine didn't stop at the counter. She stood, centered, lit by the crystal chandelier above, and said, just loud enough for the room to hear, "I have the system logs. I know exactly what you did. And in less than 5 minutes, so will your employer." Right then, as if summoned by the weight of those words, the entrance doors slid open with a quiet sigh, and Marcus Crockett stepped into the room. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone commanded silence. The soft hum of conversation died mid-sentence. replaced by the sound of polished shoes meeting marble with military precision. Dressed in a jet black suit, crisp as a battlefield salute, Marcus moved like a man who had cleared war zones and boardrooms with the same cold efficiency. Broad-shouldered, eyes locked ahead, his jaw set like stone. He was the storm after the silence. Guests instinctively stepped aside. A concierge nearly dropped his clipboard. Even the music overhead seemed to mute itself. He scanned the lobby with the calm intensity of someone trained to assess threat levels in seconds. And then his eyes found Jasmine, standing tall, composed, and holding the truth like a loaded weapon. In that moment, the room no longer belonged to the hotel. It belonged to them. He scanned the lobby with the calm intensity of someone trained to assess threat levels in seconds. And then his eyes found Jasmine, standing tall, composed, and holding the truth like a loaded weapon. In that moment, the room no longer belonged to the hotel. It belonged to them. Marcus crossed the space between them in a straight line, guests and staff instinctively moving aside like they knew better. When he reached her, he didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, eyes searching. Then low and steady, he asked, "Are you okay?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Jasmine gave the faintest nod, controlled but tight. "I'm fine," she replied, then met his eyes. "But you need to see this." She handed him the phone, her screen already glowing with the system logs. Without breaking momentum, Jasmine turned slightly to face the front desk, lifting her voice just enough to be heard clearly, precisely. "Reservation confirmed at 3:42 p.m., she said. "Under the name Laverne Washington, Suite 1503. System ID is right here. No system error, no overlap. This wasn't an accident." She swiped to the next screen. At 5:04 p.m., the receptionist searched my name. Jasmine Crockett. 3 minutes later, she manually deleted the reservation. No reason given, just erased. The tone wasn't angry. It was clinical, surgical, and that made it more dangerous. Sloane's face paled. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard but didn't move. She looked from Jasmine to Marcus and back again. Her mouth opened slowly, words not quite forming. I followed internal guidelines," she said, voice now trembling under the pressure. "We're trained to preserve the tone of the hotel, to make sure the space stays inclusive, safe. I didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't meant to be personal." "It was targeted," Jasmine interrupted, calm but unshakable. "You saw my name, made a judgment, and acted on it. That's not training. That's bias." Sloane stammered, her composure cracking. "I didn't discriminate. I just thought it might be best to avoid a situation." Her words were unraveling fast. "I didn't know how others might feel." "You knew how you felt," Jasmine cut in, stepping forward, voice quiet but edged like steel. "You made a decision, not based on policy, not on process, but on a name. And now you want to explain it away as protection?" She took another step closer. "You weren't protecting the hotel. You were protecting your own comfort." The silence that followed Jasmine's final sentence wasn't just quiet, it was loaded. The kind of silence that comes just before something breaks. Sloane stood motionless behind the desk, her mouth slightly open, eyes flicking between Jasmine's unblinking stare and the phone still glowing with damning evidence. But then, slowly, Marcus stepped forward. Not like a man angry, but like one who'd made a decision. His movements were measured, deliberate, and dangerously calm. His presence pulled the weight of the room toward him. Even people in the lounge who hadn't heard the full story instinctively knew something serious was unfolding. He stopped directly in front of the counter, not looming, not posturing, just grounded, unshakable, like a wall that wouldn't move even if the building came down around it. His eyes locked onto Sloane's with a level of stillness that made her physically recoil half an inch. His voice, when it came, was low, cold, and surgically precise. Not loud, not theatrical, just final. "You just refused to serve my wife in the hotel I built, brick by brick, room by room. My name is on the deed, the title, and every inch of this foundation. So let me ask you, do you even understand what you've just done?" The question landed like a dropped hammer. Sloane's lips parted, but no sound came. Her mind clearly scrambled for a response, but no excuse dared show its face. She looked down at the desk, then at Jasmine, then back to Marcus, desperately searching for some lifeline that no longer existed. Her shoulders sank slightly, her face flushing, caught between humiliation and fear. But Marcus didn't stop there. He took another breath, controlled, intentional, and leaned in just enough to make sure she couldn't look away. You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. You searched her name. You deleted her room. And then, when she stood in front of you, with proof, you dismissed her again. Why? Because of who she is? Because of what you think she stands for? His tone wasn't accusatory. It was declarative, like reading out a list of charges. You thought no one would notice. You thought your judgment call was safe, quiet, tucked behind a screen, wrapped in company slogans about values and energy. But let me be very clear with you. That woman right there? He pointed to Jasmine, but didn't look away from Sloan. She's not just a guest. She's not just my wife. She's the one who stood up when others stayed silent. In Congress, in courtrooms, in crises. And today, she stood up to you. The pause that followed was thunderous in its stillness. Sloan looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Her voice, when it finally came, was little more than a whisper. I didn't mean harm. I thought I was doing what the brand expected. Marcus straightened, his face hard as granite. If this is what you think our brand stands for, he said, voice calm but deadly, then you don't belong here. And with that, the air shifted again. It wasn't just about a reservation anymore. It was about power, responsibility, and the line between silent bias and public consequence. And for the first time since Jasmine had walked into that lobby, the balance of power had returned to its rightful hands. The weight of Marcus's final words still lingered in the air, echoing louder than any shout could have. The lobby had gone silent, not the comfortable, professional silence of a luxury hotel, but the tense, fragile stillness of a courtroom seconds before the verdict drops. Sloan stood behind the front desk like a statue in freefall, rigid on the outside, but clearly crumbling from within. Her eyes darted between Jasmine, Marcus, the screen, the crowd gathering in quiet curiosity, and back again. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but she said nothing, because deep down she knew. This wasn't just disciplinary. This was final. Marcus took one step closer, his tone colder than it had been all day. You're relieved of duty, effective now. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. But the calm in his voice was more terrifying than any raised fist could be. Sloane's lips parted, perhaps to protest, perhaps to plead, but no sound came. Her hands trembled as they hovered above the keyboard she no longer had the right to touch. Please, wait, she finally said, her voice cracking, barely more than a whisper. Can we talk in private? I didn't mean for this to happen like this. Marcus didn't even blink. This is your version of private. You made it public the moment you decided to erase someone else's place in this building, based on a name. He gestured subtly to the phone Jasmine still held. The screen dimmed now, but the evidence burned in everyone's mind. You tried to bury her identity under protocol, and now protocol's burying you. Sloane's posture collapsed an inch further, her voice shrinking into desperation. But I was just trying to protect the culture here. I thought that's what you wanted this place to be. Safe. Inclusive. Inclusive, Marcus cut in, his tone sharp but level. You don't create safety by deciding who deserves to be here based on their politics. You create fear. You create division. You turned a five-star hotel into a filtered echo chamber. That was never the mission. Guests nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Phones were still. No one was filming. This was too real, too raw. It wasn't entertainment. It was justice unfolding in front of them. Marcus turned to a nearby security officer stationed by the concierge. His command came with calm authority. Escort Ms. Hayes to HR. She has 10 minutes to collect her belongings. After that, she's no longer authorized on the property. The officer nodded and began walking forward without a word. Sloane's eyes welled, her hands clutching the edge of the desk as if it could stop what was already in motion. I gave everything to this job, she muttered, barely audible. I tried to do the right thing. No, Jasmine said softly but firmly, stepping beside Marcus now. You tried to control who belonged, based on what you believed was right. That's not justice. That's arrogance. Sloane didn't reply. She turned slowly, shoulders slumped, her name badge still pinned to her chest like a label that no longer applied. As she walked out from behind the desk, her footsteps echoed more loudly than before. Not because of her heels, but because they were the steps of someone who had just lost everything in the place they thought they controlled. She didn't look back, because there was nothing left to look back to. The hush in the lobby remained thick, almost ceremonial, when the side door near the concierge suddenly swung open with a sharp click. Mark Ellison, the hotel's general manager, appeared, slightly out of breath, his suit rumpled, the skin beneath his collar damp with nervous sweat. He wasn't composed, he wasn't prepared. He looked like a man who'd just run into a meeting he was supposed to be leading, but didn't know what room it was in. He took a few hurried steps toward the desk, scanning the room, the energy, the expressions. It only took him a second to realize something irreversible had already happened. I just heard there was an issue at the front, he said, his voice pitched too high to sound in control. I didn't know how serious it was, or I would have stepped in sooner. I was in the back reviewing vendor invoices. He trailed off as his eyes met Marcus's, then Jasmine's. Their silence was far more intimidating than shouting ever could be. He tried again. I didn't realize she had escalated things. Sloane's always been vocal, yes, but I was trying to avoid direct conflict. She's passionate. I didn't want to stifle that. Marcus took one step forward, his expression unreadable. But his voice? It cut through the space with unflinching authority. Are you in charge here, Mark? Or do your employees run this hotel while you hide in the back? Mark's mouth opened slightly, but Marcus didn't wait for a reply. He kept going, tone ice cold. You let a junior staffer take control of the lobby. You let her erase a confirmed guest booking without reason. Not just any guest, my wife. You didn't just miss this, you allowed it. Mark raised both hands, palms out, as if to block the blow that had already landed. I didn't know she'd crossed that line. She's always talked about inclusivity and guest experience. I thought she meant well. I didn't want to stifle her expression or create tension among the staff. It's a fine line between allowing space and pushing back too hard. That's when Jasmine stepped in, quiet, precise, but devastating. You didn't draw a line, Mark. You erased one. You let her turn personal beliefs into a weapon. You let someone's comfort zone become the limit for everyone else's rights. Mark blinked rapidly. I understand it looks bad, but I was just trying to create a work culture where people could express themselves freely. At the expense of your guests? Jasmine asked, her tone low but cutting. You call this freedom? She didn't express herself. She deleted me. From the system, from the lobby, from my own husband's hotel, and you let her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was crushing. Mark's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His eyes flicked around the lobby, now filled with witnesses who were no longer pretending not to listen. A guest standing near the elevator muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. Another guest near the bar folded her arms, watching like a jury member waiting for the judge to speak. You didn't protect the culture, Marcus said flatly. You protected your own comfort. You avoided hard conversations, and now we're cleaning up your cowardice. There was nowhere for Mark to look that didn't reflect his failure back at him. Not in Jasmine's calm fury, not in Marcus's deadly stillness, not in the quiet condemnation of a lobby that had just seen how leadership fails. Not with malice, but with silence. The tension in the lobby had shifted again, but it hadn't lifted. Sloane was gone. The truth had been dragged out into the light. And Mark stood at the center of it all, sweat clinging to his collar, his eyes hollowed with the weight of what he'd just been told. He didn't argue anymore. He didn't explain. He just stood there, absorbing the judgment, the embarrassment, and the cold realization that everything he'd tried to avoid had just exploded under his watch. Marcus let the silence stretch for a beat longer, then finally turned to Jasmine. Their eyes met. No words, just that unspoken conversation built over years of mutual trust. Then Marcus looked back at Mark. You stay, he said simply, the words falling like stone. For now. Mark's eyes widened slightly, the smallest flicker of relief flashing across his face. But Marcus wasn't finished. You're on notice. One more incident, one more lapse, one more case of selective blindness like today, and you won't be walking out with a warning. You'll be walking out with your things. The words were calm, almost too calm, and that made them even more final. Mark nodded quickly, trying to compose himself, but Marcus raised a hand, cutting him off before he could speak. Don't thank me. This isn't grace. It's a contract. Then he stepped back, allowing Jasmine to step forward. The energy shifted again, not softer, sharper. This wasn't a man issuing a final word. This was a woman beginning a restructuring. Jasmine's tone was clean, clear, and absolute. Effective immediately, I want a second layer of leadership in place. Someone I trust. Someone who doesn't flinch when values collide with pressure. She took a slow step closer to Mark, who blinked at her, unsure where this was going. You'll retain your title for now, but you will no longer operate without oversight. Mark swallowed hard. What kind of oversight? I'm bringing someone in from my DC office, Jasmine replied. She's a senior aide who worked on my internal ethics task force. She handled more personnel misconduct cases in 1 year than you've likely seen in your career. She's firm, fair, and doesn't ask twice. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight in it was unmistakable. She'll serve as Deputy General Manager, effective immediately upon arrival. Marcus gave a small nod beside her. It wasn't a suggestion, it was done. Mark shifted uncomfortably. You mean, she'll report to me, or... She'll report to both of us, Jasmine answered without hesitation. You'll operate as equals. Every decision regarding hiring, dismissal, and disciplinary action will be reviewed by her. If there's even the hint of political bias in how guests or staff are treated, she'll escalate it directly to my office. And if you so much as blink the wrong way at it, you're out. The lobby had thinned slightly by now, but the few guests still lingering near the bar or the lounge remained rooted in place. They weren't rubbernecking for gossip anymore. They were watching something unusual unfold. Accountability, delivered in real time, without PR buffers or legal departments. Just truth, consequence, order being reestablished by the very people it had tried to exclude. Mark was silent for a long moment, not in defiance, just in realization. Understood, he said finally. His voice was quiet, tired, real. What's her name? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Elise Morton. You'll be getting an email from her within the hour. She stepped back, letting her words sink in. You're not being replaced, Mark. Not yet. But you are being watched closely. If you're willing to prove that leadership still means something to you, you'll have that chance. But don't confuse this for leniency. It's structure. What should have been here from the beginning? Marcus nodded, folding his arms across his chest. We built this place on excellence, not excuses. It wasn't meant to be a political theater. It's not a battleground. It's a business. And right now, it needs leaders who remember that. Mark nodded again, this time slower, more grounded. Yes, sir. Jasmine took one final look around the lobby. The crystal light above still glittered against the polished marble floors. The grand piano in the corner, untouched during the confrontation, sat in perfect stillness, a symbol of order. Elegance, silence. She turned back to Marcus, voice lower now, meant just for him. This can't happen again. Not here. Not in our name. It won't, he said, with the certainty of a man who'd made promises on battlefields and in boardrooms alike. Jasmine exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in resolve. I want the staff rebriefed. New policy language. I want political neutrality spelled out clearly in the employee handbook. And I want Elise to be given direct access to every training, every personnel file, every complaint. Marcus nodded. Done. And Mark, she added, turning one last time to the manager, who now stood straighter, but still shaken. You're being offered something rare, a second chance. Don't mistake that for immunity. Leadership doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means standing between your team and failure. And today you didn't. I hear you, Mark said, quieter still. I hear both of you, Loud and clear. Jasmine offered no response. She didn't need to. The rules had been rewritten, the hierarchy redefined. A new presence was coming, and the leash had been pulled tight. This wasn't punishment. This was structure. And from here forward, structure meant survival. And as the lobby slowly returned to motion, bellhops moving, guests whispering, phones lighting up, one truth lingered louder than the rest. Order had been restored, but under new eyes. The final conversation with Mark had barely concluded when Jasmine turned and began walking toward the center of the lobby, heels echoing sharply across the marble like a metronome of justice. Her posture was upright, commanding, not the posture of a woman who had simply won an argument, but one who was now writing new rules. A hush fell again, instinctive. Every remaining guest, every staff member lingering near the edge of the room, seemed to pause, sensing that the next words spoken were no longer about one incident. They were about the future. Jasmine stopped beneath the chandelier, the same place she had stood hours earlier when she was dismissed with a smile. Now she stood not as a guest, not even as a woman wronged, but as a leader about to redefine the walls around her. "I want everyone listening," she began, her voice calm but deliberate, "because what I say next won't be repeated. It will be enforced." Marcus stood just behind her, arms crossed, a silent wall of support. Across the lobby, Mark lingered near the edge, pale but still present. Two junior front desk agents stood stiffly behind the counter, wide-eyed and silent. "We are implementing a zero-tolerance policy effective immediately," Jasmine continued. "Any staff member, regardless of rank or tenure, who refuses service to a guest based on personal, political, religious, or ideological reasons," she paused, scanning the room, "will be terminated on the spot. No deliberation, no hearing, no second chance." The words hit like a shot of ice through the room. There was no anger in her tone, only steel, controlled, final. "This building," she said, gesturing around her with one hand, "is not a platform for personal agendas. It is not a stage for activism disguised as hospitality. It is a business. But more importantly, it is a promise to every guest who walks through those doors that they will be treated with fairness, with dignity, and without prejudice." A young man near the lounge, a guest who had witnessed the earlier confrontation, nodded silently to himself. A woman with a suitcase near the elevators lowered her phone, visibly stunned by the clarity and force of the announcement. "Let me be clear," Jasmine said, her voice lowering an octave, but somehow becoming even more powerful. "We don't care who someone voted for. We don't care what podcast they listen to. We don't care what sticker is on their luggage or what article they wrote 10 years ago. If they've booked a room at Magnolia Grand, they are entitled to every ounce of respect this brand was built on." She stepped forward now, slowly, like a closing argument being delivered to a jury made up of everyone watching, guests, employees, and the world outside. "Bias of any kind has no place behind this front desk," she said. "Personal opinion is not an excuse for professional failure. If you want to make political statements, do it on your time. If you want to decide who's worthy of comfort, this isn't the building for you. Because Magnolia Grand does not just offer rooms. We offer a reflection of what fairness looks like when it's real, not performative." She turned to Marcus, who nodded once. Jasmine faced the staff once more, eyes scanning each face, letting the gravity of the moment settle in for good. "There will be no memos, no vague HR seminars. This is the new standard. Clear, immediate, absolute." Her voice sharpened at the end, a final strike of the gavel. "This isn't about being neutral. It's about being just." Someone near the concierge clapped once, then again, and soon it spread, a slow ripple of quiet applause, not for theatrics, but for truth. Even those who hadn't seen everything earlier could feel it. The building had shifted. The culture had changed. Marcus stepped forward then, speaking for the first time since the order was given. His voice was low but resonant, measured and grounded, like the foundation of the hotel itself. Magnolia Grand wasn't built to echo opinions. It was built to outlast them. What happened today won't happen again, because now we don't just have a policy, we have a principle. Jasmine nodded, then delivered the final line. the one that would define this moment long after the emails were archived and the guests checked out. "This is not just a hotel," she said quietly, but with a conviction that carried across every polished surface. "It is a reflection of what real fairness looks like, and real fairness doesn't ask who you are. It proves who we are." The room stood still, not in fear, but in understanding. The rules had changed, and with them, so had the future of the Magnolia Grand. As the last words left Jasmine's lips and the staff dispersed in stunned silence, the air inside Magnolia Grand finally began to move again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. A jazz melody, long forgotten in the background, returned through the speakers. Bellhops resumed their duties, guests checked their phones, and the illusion of normalcy tried to patch itself together. But something irreversible had already taken root. The hotel hadn't just survived a scandal, it had been transformed by it, and outside its marble walls, the world was about to find out. Because what happened in the lobby didn't stay there. Within 20 minutes of Sloane's dismissal, the first video went live. A guest who had quietly filmed the part of the confrontation, Jasmine's calm voice, Marcus's verdict, Sloane's stunned expression, uploaded the clip to X with a caption that simply read, "She didn't raise her voice once, still shut it all down." Crockett vs. Bias, Joshua Rolls-Royce reception. The post spread like wildfire. By the time Jasmine and Marcus had stepped into the executive suite upstairs for a debrief with senior staff, the hashtag had already gone viral. Within the hour, 3 different hashtags were trending nationally: Crockett and Bias, Justice at Magnolia, and the unexpected crowd favorite, Rolls-Royce reception. A callback to Jasmine's friend Marcus Langston's story, now woven into the mythos of the event. The online response fractured fast. On one side, a tidal wave of conservative voices hailed Jasmine as a warrior against ideological overreach. They reposted the video with captions like, "That's how you handle woke discrimination, cold, clean, and with receipts. She just taught every CEO in America how to lead under fire. When the left plays gatekeeper, she brings the gates down." Meme pages lit up with edits of Jasmine photoshopped into courtroom dramas, war rooms, and classic hero poses. Political influencers called her the anti-cancel queen. Military veteran accounts posted side-by-side photos of her, standing at the desk and American flags, waving at half-mast, calling it a victory for real freedom. One conservative commentator tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett didn't cancel anyone. She exposed what happens when personal politics invade professional spaces." But as quickly as praise arrived, so did the firestorm from the other side. Progressive accounts blasted the video with captions like, "So we're firing people now for their values?" Another powerful woman uses her platform to silence someone beneath her. Magnolia Grand just became the corporate arm of a conservative vendetta. A well-known activist reposted the clip with a scathing comment. Jasmine Crockett had an opportunity to educate, not retaliate. She chose to flex instead. Power abused, not justice. Blue-check academics called it a dangerous precedent. Liberal influencers claim that firing Sloane publicly was an intimidation tactic dressed up as principle. A few even accused Jasmine of enacting corporate authoritarianism in the name of decorum. And through it all, Jasmine said nothing. Not yet. She sat at the edge of the hotel suite's large desk, watching the mentions roll in like bullets across the screen. Notifications, articles, threads, praise, rage, chaos. The storm had migrated from the lobby to the feed, and it was moving fast. Marcus stood behind her, arms folded, reading the headlines over her shoulder. "They're not mad about what you did," he said quietly. "They're mad you didn't ask permission to do it." Jasmine didn't reply immediately. She was watching a video on repeat. The moment she held up her phone and said, "You didn't make a mistake, you made a choice." She watched the clip with the detached calm of someone watching security footage of a robbery they already stopped. Then she set her phone down. "I don't care if they're mad," she said finally, "but I do care if they get to twist the truth." She picked up the phone again, opened the X app, and tapped out a single line. No hashtags, no tagging, just the truth. "I didn't punish her for what she believed. I held her accountable for what she did." It's action that matters, not ideology. Truth is what they fear most. She hit post. The tweet went nuclear. Within 5 minutes, it had 20,000 likes and climbing. Screenshots of it were reposted by legal experts, journalists, political operatives, and hotel management groups around the country. It was quoted on television. One anchor called it the cleanest rebuttal to the culture war ever posted in under 280 characters. In group chats across DC and Manhattan, corporate leaders and media strategists texted each other. She just outplayed both sides. But Jasmine wasn't trying to win both sides. She was trying to tell the truth. She turned to Marcus and said, "This wasn't about power. It was about principle. If we let people rewrite that, they'll turn this whole thing into noise." He nodded once. "Then we keep the signal strong." And so they did. Over the next 24 hours, more footage surfaced. One clip caught Sloan saying offhandedly to a coworker, "We have to protect our space from people like her." Another showed Jasmine standing silent while being denied her reservation, contrasting the media narrative claiming she'd been aggressive. Screenshots of the booking logs, redacted but time-stamped, were released with Jasmine's consent, proving the deletion and the search history. Every post backed by fact. Every accusation met with proof. A journalist from a national outlet messaged Jasmine's office asking for an interview. She declined. Instead, she posted again. "You don't fight discrimination by changing who gets excluded. You fight it by refusing to exclude at all. Magnolia Grand is open to everyone because fairness doesn't check your beliefs at the door." It was retweeted by veterans, civil rights attorneys, even a handful of silent centrists who rarely weighed in at all. And slowly the conversation began to shift. Not entirely, not cleanly. There were still voices demanding boycotts, still protest threads and digital petitions accusing her of weaponizing professionalism. But there was something stronger underneath it. Clarity. People could see what had happened, not through ideology, but through action, through behavior. Through the quiet, relentless calm Jasmine had carried from the moment she'd been denied until the moment she rewrote the policy. And that's what stuck. Not the headlines, not the hashtags, but the image of a woman who never raised her voice and still reshaped the rules. The door to the presidential suite closed with a gentle click, but the moment it did, the tension shifted. The roar of the lobby, the weight of judgment, the buzz of phones and whispers, gone. In its place, silence, velvet thick and loaded. Jasmine stepped across the threshold first, her heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet. Victor followed her in, unfastening the button on his blazer as he set his phone on the bar counter. The suite around them, high ceilings, hand-carved walnut, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Austin skyline, should have offered comfort. But in this moment, it felt less like a retreat and more like a war room. Jasmine didn't sit. She walked slowly to the edge of the wide glass window and looked out over the city. The lights below twinkled like they belonged to another world, a quieter one. Her reflection stared back at her, poised, collected, but with eyes that hadn't blinked since the moment Sloan denied her. She folded her arms, letting the weight of the day settle into her bones. Victor finally broke the silence. "You didn't just hold the line today," he said, voice low and worn. "You redrew the whole battlefield." She didn't turn. "And tomorrow," she said, "they'll try to move it again." Victor stepped beside her. For a moment, they said nothing, just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the world they built glow beneath them. "You know this wasn't just about a reservation," he said. "I know," she replied. "It never was." He turned toward her, finally removing the mask of composure he'd worn all day. "Then let's make sure this doesn't stop here." Now she looked at him, sharp, deliberate, searching his face for weakness, for doubt, for any part of him that might be holding back. She found none, only fire. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking we make today the blueprint," Victor said. "Not just for Magnolia Grand, for every single property in the chain. We standardize the policy, hardline the ethics, and vet the culture down to the root. I want no gray areas, no more interpretation dressed as principle." Jasmine's gaze didn't soften, but it deepened. She turned away from the window, walked slowly toward the marble-topped bar, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. No ice. She handed him one. Then finally sat down. I agree, she said, but we don't start with rules. We start with the why. Victor raised an eyebrow. The why? Jasmine nodded, voice quieter but tighter now, like a coiled wire. Because if we only react to today, we lose tomorrow. This can't just be about fixing a PR nightmare. It has to be about setting a new gold standard for service, for fairness, for courage. Victor took a long sip from his glass. You're thinking bigger than policy. I'm thinking bigger than hotels. She stood again, pacing now, not nervously but tactically. Look around. This country is divided, not by borders or ballots, but by fear. Fear of being misjudged, fear of being misunderstood, and fear of speaking truth when someone might call it oppression. That fear has seeped into every room, into classrooms, offices, and yes, lobbies. We walked into it today, and we shut it down. But if we don't turn that moment into structure, it'll be nothing but noise. Victor listened in silence. Jasmine's voice had changed. She wasn't talking like a guest or even a partner. She was talking like a strategist, a force. I want a task force, she said finally. Internal, multidisciplinary, not just HR or legal. I want sociologists, behavioral psychologists, people who understand where tension hides. I want them to build training that's not just compliance, it's clarity. I want managers to stop being afraid of offending their staff and start learning how to lead them. Victor set his glass down. You really think it'll work? I think it has to, she said, because if we don't do it, someone else will, and they'll do it with fear instead of truth. He exhaled slowly, pacing toward her. So we turn Magnolia into more than a hotel chain. We turn it into a model, Jasmine said, for the service industry, for leadership, for how to have standards in an age obsessed with feelings. Victor stared at her for a long moment, then cracked a quiet smile. God, I love it when you go full court press. She allowed herself a flicker of amusement, just for a breath. It's the DC in me. You never really left, he said. No, she replied, stepping closer. But today, DC came home. There was a beat of silence. Then Jasmine walked over to the built-in desk in the corner of the suite. She opened her laptop, fingers moving like muscle memory. Within seconds, she was drafting a document. New Magnolia Leadership Ethics Protocol, Phase 1. The title alone hit like a declaration of war on ambiguity. Victor leaned over her shoulder. What's the first clause? Jasmine typed slowly and deliberately. Any employee who denies service to a guest based on personal bias, political, cultural, or ideological, will be subject to immediate termination. No exception, no deliberation. Action, not motive, determines accountability. Victor nodded, then reached for his phone. I'll have our legal team and the board review this tonight. They'll push back, Jasmine said, not looking up. Let them, Victor replied. They either get on board or get out of the way. Jasmine's fingers stopped. She closed the laptop softly and turned back to him. Her expression was calm, but burning. I've defended you on the House floor, she said, voice lower now. When they came after your name, your work, your record, I stood between you and every political sniper in that room. Victor stepped closer. And now? She smiled, faint but fierce. Now I protect you here, in your own house, where the arrows don't come with microphones, they come with fake smiles and system glitches. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. They both knew what that meant. Jasmine walked slowly back toward the window, glass in hand. The city still sparkled below, unaware of the war room that towered above it. She stared out for a long moment, then turned slightly over her shoulder. And if anyone still doubts what I'm willing to do to defend justice, let them try. She turned fully now, fire in her eyes. Let them test what it costs to underestimate a woman with facts, receipts, and power. Let them feel the price of treating fairness like an accessory. Victor crossed his arms. So this is our line in the sand? No, Jasmine said. This is the steel wall they can't see until they hit it. The room was quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't the hush of uncertainty. It was the silence that follows a decision, The silence that says, there's no turning back now. And the world would soon discover Magnolia Grand was no longer just a hotel. It was a message, a warning, and a standard. One that would stand, unmoved, no matter who tried to walk in and rewrite the rules. The soft click of the suite door echoed like punctuation. Outside, the Magnolia Grand was slowly returning to its polished rhythm. Gloved staff moving with grace, guests sipping cocktails in the bar, conversations resuming beneath glittering chandeliers. But up here, on the top floor, the air remained taut. Jasmine stood still by the wide glass windows, arms crossed, watching the city breathe beneath her. Behind her, Victor sat quietly on the leather sofa, turning his whiskey glass in his hand, but saying nothing. The war was over, for now. But in its wake came something even heavier, the meaning of it all. I keep thinking about how easy it is, Jasmine said at last, her voice low, level. How easy it is to use freedom as an excuse to hurt someone, to twist the words until the wound looks like principle. Victor looked up, eyes locked on hers. He knew she wasn't speaking rhetorically. She was building to something. People always talk about their right to speak, she continued, turning slowly from the window. But no one talks about what happens when speech is used as a shield, when it becomes the reason someone gets erased. She took a breath, steady and deliberate. That's what happened down there, in our lobby. A woman weaponized her personal beliefs, dressed them up in the language of progress, and used them to decide who deserved to be here. Victor nodded slightly, still quiet. And the worst part, Jasmine said, voice tightening, she thought she was doing the right thing. She walked slowly to the edge of the table, opened her phone, and watched as the notification count climbed. Tens of thousands of mentions. Videos. Hashtags. Praise and fury pouring in by the second. She let the screen dim, then set it face down on the table. I don't care what side they're on, she said. Left, right. It doesn't matter. What matters is they're both missing the point. Victor raised an eyebrow. And what's the point? Jasmine looked at him, and when she spoke, her voice was colder, sharper. Freedom of speech is not a weapon, and it sure as hell isn't a pass to strip others of theirs. The silence that followed was electric. Victor leaned back, letting her words hang. Then he said carefully, they'll accuse you of censorship. She nodded. They already have. They'll say you fired someone because you didn't like her views. She wasn't fired for what she believed, Jasmine said. She was fired for what she did. And there it was, the heart of it. She didn't just disagree with me, Jasmine continued, walking slowly around the room. She acted. She used her position to deny service, based on nothing but personal judgment. That's not freedom. That's control. That's the exact opposite of what free speech is supposed to defend. Victor stood now, joining her at the window. So what do we tell them? Jasmine turned to face him fully. Her posture straightened, her shoulders squared. She didn't blink. We tell them this, she said. That disagreement is not danger. That protest is not oppression. And that if your idea of freedom means denying someone else's dignity, then you've never understood freedom at all. She picked up her phone again and typed, slowly, deliberately. Freedom of speech is not a license to erase others because you disagree with them. Don't confuse your right to protest with the right to oppress. She hit post. It took less than 30 seconds for the tweet to go viral. Across X, replies flooded in. Some cheered. She nailed it. That's the line the whole country needs to hear right now. Crockett just taught a masterclass in accountability without censorship. This is how you lead in the middle of chaos. Others attacked. She's punishing people for thought crimes. Authoritarian in heels. Funny how justice looks a lot like control when it's your politics getting enforced. Jasmine scrolled through them all, unshaken. I don't need them to agree, she said aloud. I just need them to understand. Victor turned toward her, voice low. And if they don't? She looked out at the skyline. Lights flickered across office towers. Headlights moved like stars across highways. The world was watching, and that's exactly what she wanted. Then let them try to fight it, she said. Let them shout. Let them spin. But they'll never be able to erase the truth. Not this time. Victor walked to the sideboard, poured another drink, and handed it to her. "You've made this hotel a battlefield," he said. "No," Jasmine corrected, taking the glass. "They did. I just refused to let them win on our ground." There was a pause. Victor sipped, then spoke carefully. "What happens now?" Jasmine's eyes didn't leave the window. "Now," she said, "now we make sure they can't turn this into another culture war talking point. Now we set the standard." She stepped away from the glass, back toward the table, where her laptop was already open. She began typing again, this time drafting an internal statement for the Magnolia Grand chain. It wasn't policy, it was doctrine. "Our commitment is simple. No guest will be refused service on the basis of personal, political, or ideological identity. Any employee who violates this principle will be subject to immediate dismissal, not because of what they believe, but because of what they do. There will be no room for bias in a space that promises safety to all." She looked over it once, then saved it, then stood up. Victor looked at her. "You're not done." She nodded. "Not until this becomes more than a moment, until it becomes a message." He smiled faintly. "You always were better at making things permanent." She looked back at him, a flicker of warmth crossing her face. "I defended you in D.C., Victor, in a chamber full of wolves with pens. I stood between you and their spin because I knew the truth. And now," he asked, "now I defend you here, in the place that carries your name, your reputation, our promise." Her eyes darkened slightly. "And if anyone still doubts what I'm willing to do to protect justice, let them try me." Victor raised his glass. "To truth." Jasmine tapped hers gently against his. "To consequences." They drank in silence. The suite, bathed in low amber light, felt less like a retreat and more like Command Central now. Outside, the city buzzed on. But inside this room, the real shift had happened. Jasmine walked back to the window once more and looked out. Not at the skyline, but at the reflection of herself. A woman who had walked into a hotel lobby and been told she didn't belong. Who had faced dismissal not just of her booking, but of her worth. And who had answered not with anger, but with clarity, with proof, with consequence. This wasn't about ego. This was about integrity. And in that moment, one final thought anchored itself in her chest like steel. If freedom becomes a weapon to silence others, it stops being freedom. And if you use your voice to erase someone else's place in the world, you're not speaking freely. You're just hiding your prejudice in prettier words. And Jasmine Crockett had run out of patience for pretty words. It was time for plain ones. And plain ones, when backed by truth, were impossible to erase. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. On live Fox News, America held its breath as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a black female lawmaker, stood up and faced off against Hollywood legend Robert De Niro. No shouting, no theatrics. With just a simple hand gesture, she exposed his double standards, sending De Niro into visible panic. The entire studio froze. No one could believe what they were witnessing. What was in that clip that made a Hollywood icon fall silent in front of the truth? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights inside the Fox News studio were blinding, but not enough to hide the tension hanging thick in the air. This wasn't just another political segment. It felt like the beginning of a showdown. The backdrop gleamed in conservative reds and blues, the logo spinning slowly behind the desk, as if daring any Democrat to step onto their turf. It was a stage designed for confrontation, and everyone in the room knew it. The network had invited Robert De Niro, not just as a Hollywood legend, but as a vocal Trump critic, someone who never shied away from controversy. He came dressed in a dark tailored suit, walking slow, deliberate, with the confidence of a man used to controlling the narrative. Cameras zoomed in as he took his seat, adjusted the mic, and scanned the room with eyes that had stared down mob bosses on screen, but were now focused on a very real political opponent, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. At first, the host asked soft questions about De Niro's latest film, a gangster epic set to release next month. He played along, answering with charm and wit. But then came the pivot. With no cue, no warning, he leaned forward and changed the tone of the conversation. "You know what really worries me?" he began, voice lower, eyes sharp. "It's not just Trump anymore. It's what people like Jasmine Crockett are turning our party into." The studio fell into a stunned silence. The audience blinked. Was this happening live? De Niro continued, calm but cold. "She's loud, and I don't mean passionate. I mean disruptive. Always looking to pick a fight. Always bringing the drama when we should be bringing the facts. It wasn't a difference of opinion. It was a direct, unprovoked character assassination. Then came the real gut punch. She thinks shouting down Republicans makes her brave," De Niro sneered. "But all it does is make us look divided and out of control." He didn't say her name again, but he didn't have to. Everyone watching knew who he meant. He was referring to the viral moments where Jasmine Crockett had clashed head-on with the likes of James Comer and Marjorie Taylor Greene. The clips where she refused to be interrupted, refused to play polite, and refused to let herself be disrespected. And now De Niro, one of the loudest voices against Trump, was using those same clips to paint her as the problem. "We used to value grace and intelligence," he said, "not finger-pointing and eyeliner." A few audience members chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable. De Niro sat back, satisfied, unaware, or unwilling to admit just how deeply those words cut. The moment De Niro's final words echoed through the studio, the crowd fractured like glass under pressure. From the right wing of the audience, where Fox News loyalists sat with folded arms and expectant grins, came an immediate burst of reaction. Sharp whistles, gleeful claps, and murmured laughter. It was the sound of vindication. "They're turning on each other," one man said under his breath, nudging the person next to him. The smirks spread like wildfire, their expressions reading not just amusement but satisfaction, like predators watching prey devour itself. For months, they had labeled the Democratic Party as chaotic, divided, and leaderless. And now, live on their home turf, a liberal legend was seemingly confirming every bit of it. A Hollywood icon attacking a progressive congresswoman? On this stage? In their minds, it was better than scripted drama. Clips were already being trimmed on smartphones, captions crafted with snark. Even De Niro's sick of the squad. But across the room, a very different energy surged. Tight-lipped rage, shock, and an almost tangible disbelief. The progressive audience members, many of whom came to support Jasmine Crockett or simply represent the newer voice of the Democratic Party, sat frozen in their seats. A young woman in the third row muttered, "Are you serious right now?" Another, a man in a faded Bernie 2016 shirt, stared at the screen in disbelief, jaw clenched. To them, this wasn't just a misstep, it was a betrayal. "He really just did that? On Fox?" One woman said, barely keeping her voice steady. It wasn't only that De Niro had criticized Crockett, it was where he did it, how he did it, and who he was. A white millionaire, once celebrated for yelling "Famaing Trump" on national television, had now decided that a young black congresswoman was the real problem. The injustice was blinding, the hypocrisy suffocating. Jasmine hadn't even spoken yet, but already she was being dissected, dismissed, and disrespected. And from her supporters' eyes, the message couldn't be clearer. If this is how the old guard treats their own, what hope is there for change? The tension was still thick in the air when it happened. Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage, unannounced, unexpected, and utterly unshaken. There was no applause, no pre-recorded cue, no camera pan, just the soft, deliberate sound of her heels against the studio floor as she moved toward the center, like a woman who had just heard her name dragged through the dirt and decided to respond in person. She didn't glance at the audience. She didn't look to the host. Her eyes were locked on Robert De Niro, the man who had just criticized her on live television with the confidence of someone who thought she wouldn't be there to respond. But now she was, fully present, fully composed. Her outfit spoke volumes. Jet black tailored vest, sharp shoulders, silver earrings, and hair pulled into tight, neat braids that framed a face carved from focus. She didn't come to perform. She came to confront. Jasmine stood at the edge of the stage, hands steady at her sides, and when she spoke, her voice was not raised, but it cut through the silence like a scalpel. "I may not fit into your idea of polite politics," she began, eyes never leaving his. "But I wasn't elected to be quiet. I was elected to fight for people who don't get invited to rooms like this." Her words were sharp, precise, and painfully true. "You want to talk about tone? You want to talk about behavior?" she continued. "I don't see you calling out the Republicans who shout over me in hearings, who roll their eyes, who wave pictures of my colleagues' families in my face. I don't see you criticizing them for turning Congress into a circus. But the minute I raise my voice to defend myself, suddenly I'm the problem." Her voice didn't tremble. It carried weight, not just because of what she said, but because everyone in that room knew she was right. She paused only long enough to let the silence settle, to let the truth land hard in every corner of the studio. "You didn't call me out because I was wrong," she said, leaning forward just enough to drive it home. "You called me out because I made you uncomfortable." And there it was, the raw nerve, the thing no one wanted to say, but everyone felt, that her existence, her confidence, her refusal to sit quietly was too much for the old guard to handle. "I don't yell because I want attention," she added, voice lower now, more controlled, more dangerous. "I yell because I've been ignored. I speak up because silence never protected people like me. And if that bothers you, maybe it's time you ask why." The room remained breathless, a single heartbeat away from combustion. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just entered the conversation. She had flipped the entire narrative in under 2 minutes. And every person watching knew this wasn't just a response, it was a reckoning. The room was still hanging on every word, tension like a taut wire ready to snap. Jasmine Crockett stood firm, eyes locked, voice steady. But her next move wasn't emotional, it was surgical. She shifted from fire to fact. "Let's not pretend this is about decorum," she said, pausing just long enough for the audience to feel the weight of what was coming. "Let me remind you, on record, what actually happens when I speak up in Congress." Her tone tightened, not louder, just sharper, like a blade being drawn. "During a House Oversight Committee hearing, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene looked straight at me and said, and I quote, 'I think your fake eyelashes are interfering with your ability to understand what's happening.'" Her voice didn't crack. She didn't flinch. She just let the words hang there, ugly and real. There was a slight stir in the crowd. Some shifted in their seats. Others looked away. Jasmine continued, her delivery crisp, exact. "That wasn't a political disagreement. That wasn't about policy. That was personal. That was an insult wrapped in misogyny and racism, hurled at a sitting member of Congress on national television." She glanced at the cameras, then back to De Niro. "And when I called it out, when I dared to respond and defend myself, I wasn't applauded. I was labeled aggressive, combative, even unhinged by certain media outlets." She held up a hand as if anticipating the next rebuttal. "So let's be clear. I'm not out here throwing tantrums. I'm standing my ground in rooms that were never built for me." The crowd was still reeling from Jasmine's last words when she paused, letting the weight of her silence tighten the grip on the room like a closing fist. Her voice had been sharp, her arguments precise, but now she was about to draw something deeper, a card no one saw coming. She slowly turned back toward De Niro, her eyes calm, calculating, and without raising her voice, she said, "You know, there was a moment that told us everything we needed to know about whose anger is allowed, whose voice gets applauded." The studio lights reflected off her braided hair as she took a single step to the side, clearing the space behind her. "Tony Awards 2018, she said evenly, not with bitterness, but with a clarity that cut like ice. "You walked on stage, looked America in the eye, and screamed, 'I've Trump.' You didn't whisper it, you shouted it. And what did the room do?" Her lips curled slightly, not into a smile, but something more dangerous. Certainty. They stood. They clapped. They called you a hero. She didn't add drama. She didn't draw it out. Instead, with all the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, Jasmine turned her head toward the production booth. She didn't speak into her mic. She didn't gesture wildly. She simply raised her hand and made a small circular motion with her fingers, like a director calling action. The cue was unmistakable. The control room hesitated for half a beat, caught between protocol and awe. Then the LED screen behind her flickered to life. The studio dimmed just enough to throw the audience's focus forward, where the past was about to confront the present. No one moved. Even De Niro leaned forward slightly, confusion, or was it fear, settling into his posture. Jasmine stood still as a statue, eyes forward, her silhouette framed by the cold light of the screen. She didn't need to narrate. The footage was about to speak louder than anything she or anyone could say. And once it did, there would be no walking it back. The screen burst to life with a clean, dramatic flicker. And in the darkened studio, all eyes snapped forward. What appeared wasn't a smear or taken out of context. It was the full clip. Unedited, unfiltered, undeniable. Robert De Niro, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, stepped onto the stage of the 2018 Tony Awards like a general, arriving at a war he'd already won. The camera caught the pride in his stance, the way his chest swelled as he reached the microphone. And then he said it, no hesitation, no preamble. He leaned in and shouted, "Fuck Trump!" The words blasted from the studio speakers with full clarity, hitting the current audience like a punch they didn't see coming. And on the screen, the crowd went wild. The audience at Radio City Music Hall leapt to their feet as if they'd been waiting all night for that exact moment. Men in suits, women in gowns, actors, producers, Broadway legends. They roared, clapped, whistled, some even laughing with joy. The ovation wasn't polite, it was thunderous. The camera panned to celebrities mouthing, "Wow," others nodding in admiration, and one visibly mouthing back, "Respect." It was celebration. It was spectacle. It was a man being crowned, not condemned. And the applause just kept coming. But back in the Fox News studio, the contrast was brutal. No one clapped here. Not a whisper, not a murmur. Just thick, heavy silence. The same man who had once been praised for yelling into a mic was now seated in that same silence. Eyes locked on the screen as if watching a stranger. His jaw was tight, his fingers curled slightly on the armrest. That old fire he'd delivered so proudly just moments earlier. It now echoed across the room like an accusation. Jasmine Crockett stood motionless at center stage, her arms at her sides, posture firm, framed in the cold white light spilling off the LED wall behind her. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't even glance at De Niro. Her gaze was fixed forward, steady, allowing the footage to do the work. She didn't need to narrate. This wasn't performance. It was cross-examination. And the witness on trial was now watching his own testimony. Even the audience, which had been reactive and restless just minutes ago, sat frozen. Some shifted in their chairs. Others looked sideways, trying not to meet each other's eyes. A few MAGA-leaning guests wore smirks, as if silently thinking, "This just got good." But most looked exposed, like the clip had peeled back something too close to home, a truth they weren't ready to face. The applause from 2018 kept echoing in their minds, clashing hard against the silence that surrounded Jasmine now. It wasn't just about what De Niro had said, it was about what had been allowed for him and denied to her. And just as the final echoes of applause from the 2018 clip faded into the air, it happened. Robert De Niro snapped. His face, once composed and carved with theatrical confidence, twisted in visible discomfort. His jaw tightened, and in one sudden, unguarded movement, he lurched forward from his chair. "Turn it off," he barked, his voice louder than it had been all night, raw, cracking at the edges. "Turn that damn thing off, now!" He jabbed a trembling finger toward the screen like it was a threat, like his own past words were betraying him in real time. His body shook, not from passion, but from panic. The man who once stood on a national stage, fists raised and defiant, was now pointing wildly at a monitor, demanding silence from a truth he himself had once screamed. The studio froze, not in awe, but in shock. The audience had never seen this side of him. Not the legend, not the fighter. This was something else. Fragile, defensive, unraveling. Jasmine didn't move, didn't flinch. She remained centered, still framed in the cold glow of the fading screen, her expression unreadable, her silence more powerful than any rebuttal. The clip had said it all, and De Niro's meltdown was only adding punctuation. In this moment, the hypocrisy wasn't just revealed, it was embodied. Here was a man once hailed for roaring against power, now unable to endure the sound of his own rebellion reflected back at him. The double standard had come full circle, and under the lights of live television, Robert De Niro wasn't the prosecutor anymore. He was the exposed. The reckoning wasn't loud, was surgical, and it had already landed. As the screen behind her faded to black and the last echo of De Niro's infamous "Fuck Trump" dissolved into silence, Jasmine Crockett stood still. The moment lingered, not rushed, not dramatized, just raw and suspended in time. De Niro remained frozen halfway out of his chair, his hands still in the air like a man caught mid-collapse. Not physically, but in pride. His face had lost its color. His eyes darted across the studio, searching for control, for dignity, for a way to undo what had just unfolded in front of millions. And yet Jasmine didn't speak, not immediately. She waited, letting the discomfort hang in the air like smoke after a fire. She wanted them all to feel it, not just him, but everyone watching. Then, with composure that was colder than fury, she stepped forward and faced him. Her voice was measured, not loud, not theatrical, just deliberate, like each word had been honed for this exact moment. "Fascinating," she said quietly, but with unmistakable sharpness. "When you shout profanity on national television in a tuxedo, it's called brave. It's celebrated, applauded, a standing ovation. You're a hero." She paused, letting each sentence cut deeper than the last. "But when someone elected to serve the people, speak up in a hearing, raise my voice to defend myself against mockery and disrespect, suddenly I'm called loud, aggressive, unhinged, too much." She didn't move closer, but her voice did, closing the distance like a blade sliding between armor plates. "You say you've spent your life fighting injustice. Then tell me, why is it that the moment a woman like me speaks truth to power, you can't sit through 30 seconds of your own words?" Her gaze locked onto his with an intensity that didn't need volume to be commanding. "That clip didn't twist your message. It didn't edit you. It showed you exactly as you were, unfiltered, angry, standing tall against something you hated, and everyone clapped." Her tone dropped slightly, like a weight being lowered onto the chest of the room. "I did the same. I stood up. I pushed back. But I didn't get applause. I got headlines calling me toxic, got people asking whether I even belonged in the room." She turned, half facing the audience now, widening the lens. "So I have to ask, what's the real difference? Is it the tone, the volume, or is it the uniform?" Her voice hardened. "Is it because I'm not wearing a tuxedo? Because I don't have a spotlight or 2 Oscars sitting behind me?" Then she faced him again, slowly, like a closing door. "Is that what makes my voice less valid to you?" Each word was like a gavel, echoing through the studio with surgical rhythm. "Because I don't look like you? Because I don't come from your world? Because I don't walk onto stages? I fight to be allowed to stay in the room?" She stopped there, not because she ran out of things to say, but because she knew the silence after her words would say the rest. The power didn't come from raising her voice. It came from refusing to shrink. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was tearing down a hierarchy built on who gets to be angry and who gets to be admired for it. And De Niro, for all his legacy, had no answer. De Niro's mouth opened as if instinctively, his body leaning forward like he was reaching for the threat of a rebuttal. But nothing came. No clever retort, no sharp counter, just a dry silence hanging between his parted lips and the mic in front of him. His face was flushed, not with the fire of righteous anger anymore, but with the dull red of someone realizing, too late, that the ground beneath him had shifted. His eyes darted across the studio, scanning the audience, looking for affirmation that wasn't there, looking for a lifeline, but none came. He adjusted his suit jacket with shaky hands, perhaps out of habit, perhaps to steady himself. But the room had already moved on from him. Jasmine had turned. She didn't need to watch him struggle. She'd made her point, not through rage or volume, but by holding up a mirror he could no longer look into. Now facing the audience, Jasmine Crockett stood alone beneath the studio lights. But there was nothing small about her. She didn't puff up, didn't bask in the moment. She simply stood, like a pillar, grounded and unshakable. Her voice came steady and low, but its weight filled the entire space. "Let's be honest," she began, her eyes scanning rows of still, silent faces. "This was never about volume. It was never about decorum. It's always been about power, about who is allowed to raise their voice in this country and who gets told to sit down when they do." Her words didn't lash out. They landed like truth dropping onto concrete, solid, undeniable. He yelled a "fuck Trump" in front of millions, and they called him brave. I speak with conviction during a hearing where I was insulted to my face, and I get called unhinged. She paused, not to let the drama build, but to let the contradiction settle. "So I want you to understand something," she continued, voice unwavering. Not a single syllable softened to make anyone more comfortable. "I didn't come here to be agreeable. I didn't show up to play the role someone else wrote for me. I didn't accept this invitation to prove I can behave." She took a step forward, not for effect, but for emphasis, as if every inch of movement was a statement in itself. "I came here to remind this country that truth doesn't need to be dressed in a tuxedo to matter. It doesn't need an Oscar. It doesn't need permission." Her eyes scanned the room once more, not defiant, not pleading, just clear, unapologetically clear. And then came her final blow, not shouted, not rushed, but etched into the moment like stone. "I'm not here to be palatable. I'm here to be heard. Because truth isn't about how pretty it sounds, it's about how deeply it lands." She didn't drop the mic. She didn't flinch. She simply stood still, letting the weight of her words do what 100 headlines couldn't. Flip the script. In that room under those lights, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She reclaimed the space, without apology, without theatrics, and without needing anyone's permission to speak. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching, silence isn't strength. Speaking, even when you're not expected to, is. And then, like the final snap of a taut wire, the silence broke. At first it was just one person, a soft, tentative clap from the far left side of the studio. A young woman, likely in her 20s, hands trembling slightly, stood and clapped twice before others joined in. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the sound spread like sparks catching dry grass. The applause swelled, hesitant at first, but growing bolder. Not like a concert ovation, but like the sound of a room slowly realizing that something honest, rare, and real had just happened. It wasn't polite, it was cathartic. Kind of clapping that comes from a deep, shared release, from seeing someone finally say what others only dared to whisper in frustration. Jasmine didn't look surprised. She didn't nod or acknowledge it. She simply stood there, arms at her sides, letting the moment breathe, letting the weight of her words still hum in the floor beneath her feet. Meanwhile, across the studio, the other half of the room, the conservative bloc, sat completely still. Earlier, they had laughed when De Niro threw his opening punches. They had smirked, some even elbowing each other, giddy at the sight of Democrats seemingly eating their own. But now, their arms were folded, their expressions blank. A few lowered their eyes, not out of shame, but because they had no rebuttal. Jasmine hadn't used left-wing talking points. She hadn't thrown party slogans or slogans at all. Instead, she had used De Niro's own past, his own words, his own posture, his own defiance, and turned it into a mirror. And what stared back at him wasn't power. It was contradiction. A contradiction so plain that even those who once cheered his name had nothing left to say. It was a rare kind of silence, not from boredom, not from confusion, but from recognition. They couldn't cheer for her, but they couldn't defend him either. Jasmine had walked into their arena, uninvited and outnumbered, and somehow held both sides of the room in the palm of her hand. Not by asking, not by yelling, but by being undeniable. She didn't just flip the script. She exposed who had been writing the rules all along, and in that moment, the lines blurred. It wasn't about party. It wasn't about age. It wasn't even about De Niro. It was about who gets to speak, who gets to shout, and who gets punished for doing both. And for once, everyone saw it, clear as day, live on national television. No spin, no edit, just truth, finally aired out under the lights. The moment hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The audience sat still. The cameras didn't cut away, and Jasmine stood at the center of it all, silent, composed, unshaken. Across from her, Robert De Niro adjusted in his seat, his jaw twitching ever so slightly as if wrestling with something he couldn't quite name. Shame? Pride? Discomfort? Maybe all three. The studio lights caught the sheen of sweat beginning to form near his collar as he leaned forward, trying to steady his breath, trying to pull something from his chest that didn't sound hollow. His hand reached for the mic, fingers trembling slightly. He opened his mouth, paused, then spoke, softly, almost too softly. "I just want what's best for the party," he said, as if the words were more for himself than anyone else. It was a sentence meant to sound noble, but it fell flat, hanging there without spine, without weight. The studio didn't react, not with applause, not with booing, not with anything, because by then everyone knew. That line wasn't an answer. It was an excuse, a vague shield from accountability. Jasmine, still facing the crowd, slowly turned her head toward him. She didn't scoff. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply regarded him the way you look at a man who once carried power, but no longer carried the moment. She stepped forward, unhurried, not chasing applause, just stepping into the truth with every inch of her being. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "You say that like it's enough," she said quietly, but with the force of something undeniable. "But wanting what's best for the party doesn't mean anything if it comes at the cost of silencing people like me." She turned her full body toward him now, not to dominate, but to make sure he heard her clearly. "Let me tell you something," she continued, each word pronounced with clarity earned from too many rooms that never wanted to listen. "We don't need your blessing to speak. We don't need your permission to lead. And we sure as hell don't need your discomfort to dictate our tone." Her tone didn't crack. It sharpened. "Because the truth is, our generation, we're not waiting for anyone to pass us the mic. We're building our own stages." She took a final step forward, slowly, deliberately, her presence unmistakably filling the space without a single raised voice. "We will not go silent just because our voices don't come dressed in tuxedos, or gilded in Oscars, or seasoned in Hollywood applause." She glanced back at the crowd, then toward the cameras, letting her words reach beyond the studio walls. "We are loud because we've been ignored. We are fierce because we've been underestimated. And we are rising, not to please anyone, but to be heard." Then she stopped. No smile, no grand gesture, just silence. The kind that follows truth when it's been spoken with nothing left to prove. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just finish a debate. She closed a chapter on who gets to lead, who gets to speak, and who decides whose voice matters. The studio lights had barely cooled, but the internet was already on fire. Within moments of Jasmine Crockett's final words echoing through the broadcast, "Truth doesn't need a tuxedo to have value." The clip was live on social media. First, it was a screen recording. Then came an official segment from the network. But before the control room could even line up the outro music, the hashtags had already begun. Crockett claps back. Let her speak. Oscars can't save you. The posts weren't just fast. They were relentless. Users across the platforms began reposting her mic drop moment with captions like, "That's how you dismantle a double standard." She dragged him without ever yelling. This is the future of the Democratic Party, and it's not wearing a tux. Clips flooded TikTok, some with dramatic violins, others with courtroom suspense music, Others cut in black and white like a historical film. One especially viral post looped the moment De Niro shouted, "Turn it off!" right after Jasmine calmly said, "Interesting. When you curse, it's called courage." That 6-second clip hit 1 million views in under an hour. On X, progressive accounts began calling Jasmine the voice, Gen Z's hammer, the real resistance. One user wrote, "She didn't just clap back, she reset the entire conversation." Dozens of accounts changed their profile names to "Let Her Speak." Fan edits showed her face over scenes from The Gladiator and Aaron Brockovich. And then there was De Niro. His name was trending, but in an entirely different context. The tone wasn't celebratory, it was uncomfortable. While a few longtime fans tried to defend him, he meant well. He's still a legend. The internet wasn't buying it. He got wrecked with his own words, one post said bluntly. Split screen, 2018. De Niro yelling "Fake shut Trump" versus 2025. De Niro yelling "Turn it off." Robert De Niro just learned that when the revolution grows up, it doesn't always look like you. He can't claim to be the voice of rebellion while silencing one. A strategist quote tweeted, "This is why Gen Z won't wait their turn. We know how to use a mic." The generational divide became impossible to ignore. Jasmine's support base, younger Democrats, progressive organizers, voters under 40, rallied in full force. They weren't just cheering, they were declaring her symbolic of a larger shift. "We've spent years being told to wait, to tone it down. She didn't, and she made the room hers," wrote a viral thread from a black activist in Detroit. Meanwhile, op-eds started forming within hours. Headlines teased Crockett versus De Niro, the moment that split the left. The end of deference, how a 34-year-old congresswoman redefined political voice. And amidst all of it, one comment floated to the top, pinned by thousands of likes. She didn't ask for the mic, she took it, and she used it better than anyone in that room. Would you like me to continue with the media aftermath? Cable news coverage, late-night reactions, or party response? I can write it in the same tone and energy. As the digital wave continued crashing across platforms, the airwaves picked up where the internet left off. Newsrooms scrambled. Producers cut new promos. Talk shows rearranged panels, just to discuss the moment now being dubbed the studio standoff. But even before sunrise, the analysts were already at odds. On one side, the cautious veterans, political consultants, legacy commentators, the wait your turn crowd. On cable news, a gray-haired strategist muttered, "She's sharp, no doubt, but she came in hot. That kind of energy turns voters off." Another added, "Jasmine is a force, but sometimes force needs breaks." You don't win the long game just with fire. You need finesse. Words like too passionate, too personal, undisciplined floated between sound bites. No one said it outright, but the subtext was deafening. They admired her intellect, but questioned her delivery. A judgment rarely, if ever, applied when the speaker is older, male, and white. But across the screen, and across a generational divide, came another voice, and then another, and then a wave. A younger analyst on MSNBC looked straight into the camera. Let's be honest, what made them uncomfortable wasn't her tone. It was that she took control of the narrative in a room where she wasn't expected to. That clip alone went viral again. On NPR, a black female professor of political rhetoric argued, what Jasmine did wasn't unfiltered rage, it was calibrated resistance. She didn't shout, she struck. The Atlantic ran a long-form headline that simply read, "She spoke like she belonged there, because she did." Roundtables formed. Editorials poured in. One op-ed in the Washington Post said, "If Jasmine Crockett were a white male senator from Massachusetts, this would be called a masterclass in debate." Rolling Stone's headline read, "Jasmine just gave Hollywood the civics lesson it forgot." A Sunday anchor asked bluntly, "If De Niro had shouted down a Republican, we'd call it iconic. But he interrupted a woman defending herself, and now we call her too intense?" That question echoed across both screens and social feeds. What unfolded wasn't just a media reaction. It was a reckoning, a cultural collision between old models of respectability and a new reality of unapologetic voice. Jasmine wasn't just in the headlines. She was becoming the headline. And whether analysts praised or scolded, one thing was certain: no one could ignore her anymore. She had demanded space and taken it without ever raising her voice. And now the whole country was raising theirs about her. Yet as pundits spare and hashtags climb, a deeper fracture yawns inside the Democratic Party. A raw, generational fault line that no spin room can plaster over. In private email chains, veteran strategists call it a messaging hiccup. But in backhaul whispers, it feels more like a hostile takeover. Old guard power brokers, the ones who still measure influence by cocktail party invites and Sunday show bookings, sense their grip loosening each time the clip of Jasmine Crockett flashes across a phone screen. They traded fax machines for Twitter, but never imagined the platform would elevate a 30-something congresswoman into a national avatar of unapologetic dissent. Every replay of her confrontation with De Niro is a reminder that the gatekeepers no longer control the gates. The party's youth wing sees an open door. The elders see a breach. Donor circles fret about optics. Campus organizers celebrate authenticity. What the Beltway calls drama, the streets call correction, and the longer the clip circulates, the clearer it becomes. This is not merely a skirmish. It is a transfer of power conducted in full public view. Jasmine Crockett stands at the epicenter of that transfer, embodying a trifecta long told to wait its turn: young, female, and black. She does not speak in the measured cadences of polished consultants. Her cadence is syncopated with urgency, shaped by committee rooms, where respect is rationed by seniority and skin tone. She learned early that silence is often interpreted as consent, so she treats every microphone like a lifeline thrown to people back home who never get airtime. When she walks the marble corridors of the Capitol, she is trailed by aides live streaming her steps, because transparency has become her armor. Older colleagues call it showboating. Younger activists call it survival. She knows that each time she refuses to yield the floor, another barrier splinters, one that said only certain accents, certain suits, certain pedigrees may command national attention. She has made it her mission to speak with the volume history denied her ancestors. When the cameras roll, she does not soften vowels around edges, she sharpens them. That sharpness is both sword and shield, carving space while deflecting the daggers of dismissal. For the party's elder icons, the spectacle is unsettling. An inversion of the hierarchy they spent decades climbing. De Niro, hailed for roaring "Fuck Trump" on a velvet stage, suddenly finds his brand of resistance outdated, even quaint. Hollywood progressives who once set the tone with award show monologues now watch their applause lines repurposed by a generation that grew up live streaming protests, not red carpets. Senators in bespoke suits mutter about decorum while scrolling through trending tabs that refuse to die down. Think tank veterans draft memos urging message discipline. Yet every draft leaks before breakfast, dissected by teenagers on Discord. What once felt like a proud lineage, marchers of the 60s handing the baton to artists of the 90s, now looks more like a baton wrestled mid-stride. And in that wrestling match, the old guard discovers an uncomfortable truth. Reverence has a shelf life. Respect must be renewed, not presumed. The roar of a past rebellion can become background noise when a fresher voice commands the stage. Inside the Capitol, the tension is tactile. Elevator rides where senior members avert their eyes. Caucus meetings where whispers pause as Jasmine enters. Young staffers exchange covert thumbs up when she walks by. Older aides clutch briefing folders a little tighter. In the Democratic cloakroom, someone jokes, "The party needs a referee, not a whip." Policy wonks fret that the spectacle distracts from legislation. But junior reps counter that legislation was already stalling long before Jasmine raised her voice. The Congressional Black Caucus quietly applauds her spine, even while cautioning her about cross-committee alliances. Progressive caucus Slack channels explode with gifs of her mic drop. Moderate blue dogs circulate talking points on tone. Lobbyists hover, uncertain which handshake carries tomorrow's influence. And through it all, Jasmine keeps moving. Because stillness, she knows, is surrender. Beneath the headlines lies a ledger of inequities that fuel her fire. She has been called shrill for asserting rules of order, combative for citing parliamentary precedent, performative for daring to express visible emotion. When a male colleague pounds the dais, it is passion. When she raises an eyebrow, it is attitude. Reporters ask if her hairstyle is too informal, yet never question a senator's disheveled tie. Donors whisper about electability, a coded synonym for palatability to suburban sensibilities. She files the slights away, not as wounds but as evidence, receipts of a system calibrated to muffle voices like hers. Those receipts become ammunition, each one a reminder that progress is rarely gifted, it is extracted. So when she stands before a camera, she is not one woman, she is the accumulation of every door that closed before she could knock. And every word she speaks is an invoice, sent back to history, marked overdue. Her philosophy is disarmingly simple. Deference is not diplomacy if it costs your dignity. She will negotiate on policy, but not on personhood. Icons are to be honored for their contributions, not exempted from critique. If respect is mutual, she extends it. If it is weaponized, she dismantles it. That approach unnerves colleagues who built careers on incrementalism, who believe timing is a strategy, not a tactic. But Jasmine sees time differently. Every day a constituent goes unheard is a policy failure. Waiting is a privilege she was never afforded, so she refuses to prescribe it to others. And in a party that prides itself on Big Ten inclusion, she has become the living audit. Measuring rhetoric against reality, her presence asks an uncomfortable question. Is the tent expanding, or is it just stretching to accommodate egos? In the end, the so-called drama is less a feud and more a litmus test for the party's future. Will leadership embrace a landscape where microphones no longer pass down, but pass around? Will legacy voices learn to share bandwidth with the very people their speeches claim to champion? Jasmine's clash with De Niro crystallizes that choice in high definition. She is not an outlier. She is a preview. For every Jasmine on the floor today, there are dozens watching from city councils, state houses, community boards, waiting to see if courage is punished or promoted. If the party sidelines her, it risks telling an entire generation that authenticity is expendable. If it uplifts her, it signals that conviction need not come packaged in vintage suits. Either way, the torch is moving. The only question is whether the elders will pass it with grace or have it pried from hands grown too comfortable in the spotlight. The lesson, as indelibly carved into the public consciousness by that unforgettable evening, is one that refuses to be ignored. It reverberates far beyond the confines of a television studio and echoes deep within every community that has ever been told its voice is less valuable than the glitter of accolades. No one, not even the most celebrated among us, holds an exclusive right to speak. The microphone, symbolic of power and influence, belongs equally to every individual who dares to hold it up for the sake of truth. In that charged moment, when Jasmine Crockett stood before a nation, her voice emerged not merely as an instrument of protest, but as a declaration. Words and convictions cannot be monopolized by reputation or history. For too long, society has bestowed privilege upon those who have amassed awards, who have graced silver screens and red carpets, and in doing so, has silenced countless others who struggle and fight to protect their communities. The world witnessed that on stage, where the very act of speaking became a battleground, exposing a hierarchy built on age, fame, and the hollow weight of prestige. It was not the volume of one's speech that determined its worth, but the courage with which it was delivered, the honesty that underpinned every syllable, and the fervor with which one defended those too often marginalized. Integrity, it turns out, is not measured by how long one has been in the spotlight, but by the resolve to stand by the voiceless, even when the cost is personal disgrace. This truth, raw, uncompromising, luminous, sent tremors through the established order. A seismic shift that unsettled those accustomed to dictating who may or may not speak on matters of public concern. From the earliest echoes of the confrontation, it became evident that the traditional gatekeepers were facing a reckoning they had long postponed. The star-studded luminaries, draped in accolades and laurels collected over decades, believed they possessed an inherent right to command attention and define narratives with impunity. Yet as Jasmine's words cascaded over the audience like a tidal wave, it became clear no amount of Hollywood glamour could silence the righteous indignation of someone who had fought to reclaim the platform for those long ignored. The lesson that emanated from that turbulent confrontation was one of liberation. A liberation from the antiquated notion that only the celebrated may speak, and that the rest must wait for their moment, as if moments were a scarce commodity reserved solely for the elite. Instead, Jasmine demonstrated that every voice holds power when it is used to confront injustice head-on, to challenge systems that prioritize celebrity over substance, to spotlight inequities that have festered for far too long. Her defiant stand was a masterclass in reclaiming that power, a vivid reminder that true influence is earned not by the number of awards one collects, but by the relentless determination to use one's voice for the community. In doing so, she disrupted the very foundation of a system built on legacy and exclusivity, forcing an entire generation, especially those on the margins, to recognize they too have the right and the responsibility to speak out. The injustice that Jasmine faced is a microcosm of a larger societal malaise, a reflection of how power has been hoarded by a select few, while countless voices have been muted. For decades, the dominant narrative has been engineered by individuals who wield influence as a birthright, passed down through institutions that prioritize status over sincerity. This system, steeped in tradition and guarded by those who have grown comfortable within it, has long imposed subtle yet insidious constraints on who may speak up, under what conditions, and for whose benefit. Such constraints are not always overt. They manifest in the form of double standards, where a man's outburst is a rallying cry and a woman's passion is labeled aggressive. The hypocrisy is blatant. It is cruel, a poison that undermines the strength of communities by stifling voices that don't conform to a narrow, outdated mold. Jasmine's confrontation starkly illustrated this. When you measure the value of a person's voice by age, by awards, by polish, you lose sight of the truth. And the truth is this: integrity and the right to speak out belongs to everyone. It belongs to those who've toiled in obscurity, whose voices have echoed behind closed doors, who now find themselves called upon to make the impossible possible. In her fearless act of defiance, Jasmine did not just speak for herself. She spoke for every individual ever told their voice was too loud, too raw, or too different to matter. The story does not end with a simple triumph over established authority. Rather, it is a clarion call for a broader, systemic change that challenges the very ethos by which public discourse has been governed. The fundamental message is clear. Power is not an inheritance, nor is it a commodity to be hoarded by those with higher social standing or more prestigious accolades. Power is a dynamic, evolving force that grows stronger with every individual who dares to defy the status quo. When a voice rises in protest, it is not the fame or the trophies that determine its worth. It is the sincerity with which it articulates the struggle and the unyielding commitment to the community it represents. This realization is a bitter pill for the old guard, who have long relied on their accumulated prestige as a buffer against criticism. Their fallacy, that enduring respect is solely the province of those who have a storied past, shatters in the light of a new era where authenticity and moral courage reign supreme. In this new landscape, every shout for justice is not an act of rebellion, but a necessary demand for equitable recognition. Every call to protect and uplift the disenfranchised is not a challenge to tradition, but an affirmation of a universal human right, the right to speak truth to power regardless of one's age or background. Jasmine Crockett's message, both in its content and in its delivery, underscores the urgent need for this paradigm shift. She pointedly dismantles the notion that success is measured by the brightness of one's accolades or the longevity of one's career. Rather, success is quantified by the lives you touch, the injustices you correct, and the communities you empower. Her performance on that stage was not just a retort to a specific instance of derision. It was a vivid demonstration that credibility is built on the relentless pursuit of justice and the consistent willingness to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. It is a testament to the fact that integrity is not a byproduct of accolades or a reward for conformity. It is an active, deliberate choice that requires one to challenge the entrenched systems of power and to speak out even when the cost is personal and profound. Her lesson is a seismic jolt to the established order, a reminder that true leadership does not dwell in the echo chamber of inherited fame, but in the transformative power of accountability, empathy, and unwavering resolve. As the nation absorbed the implications of that moment, the discussions transcended simple political debate and entered the realm of social consciousness. In classrooms, boardrooms, and community centers alike, people began to scrutinize the metrics by which influence had been measured for so long. They questioned why certain voices were elevated while others were systematically muffled, why courage was celebrated in one instance and condemned in another, and how the very structures of society could perpetuate a cycle of exclusion masked as tradition. Teachers used Jasmine's example as a case study on the evolution of public discourse, while activists cited her challenge as evidence that the fight for equality was not merely a political struggle, but a cultural one as well. Her defiance became a rallying cry among young people across the country, a call for a renaissance in which the ideals of justice, fairness, and inclusivity reigned over outdated notions of privilege. It was a clarion call for transformation, a bold statement that change is not only inevitable, but necessary for the survival of a society that claims to value freedom and equity. And as more voices joined the chorus, the message began to resonate beyond the confines of political debate, sparking widespread reflections on the nature of leadership, the true meaning of respect, and the enduring power of a voice that rises against oppression. This defining moment served as a powerful reminder to every individual who has ever been reminded that they must speak softly or remain silent altogether. It is a lesson that reverberates through the corridors of power, from the grand halls of Congress to the humble neighborhood gatherings, that the strength of a community is not measured by the volume of those who are already heard, but by the courage of those who dare to speak out. The legacy of Jasmine Crockett's confrontation is not written in the accolades of the past, but in the promise of a future where no one is forced to cede their right to be heard, where every voice, regardless of its origin, carries the weight of truth and the potential to ignite meaningful change. Her example is a beacon for the countless souls who have been marginalized, silenced, or overlooked. It is a declaration that the time for gatekeeping is over. The truth, as she made it crystal clear, is not granted by the elite, but seized by those who refuse to let their voices be diluted by societal expectations. As the reverberations of that historic moment continue to stir conversations across diverse platforms, from social media to scholarly journals, the essential lesson remains unequivocal. No one, not even the iconic, the revered, or the once celebrated, has the exclusive right to dictate the discourse. Every individual possesses the sovereign right to speak, to challenge, and to demand that their truths be heard. The true measure of integrity is not inscribed in the number of awards one can parade or the length of one's political career, but in the relentless commitment to defending those who have been rendered voiceless by a system steeped in tradition and inequity. Jasmine Crockett's confrontation has shattered the illusion that power is reserved solely for those already at the top. It has revealed that integrity is a quality forged in the fires of resistance, tempered by the determination to uplift a community even when the odds are stacked against you. Now, as the echoes of that confrontation spread across every corner of the nation, the message is unmistakable. The courage to speak out in the face of injustice is not a privilege granted by age, awards, or fame. It is a right inherent to every human being. And for every person who dares to challenge the status quo, the battle is not fought alone. It is a collective struggle, a shared journey toward a more equitable future in which every voice is recognized, valued, and celebrated. In this new era, where the old barriers are crumbling under the pressure of relentless authenticity, the microphone is no longer the exclusive domain of the privileged. It is the weapon of the righteous, the instrument of change, and the symbol of a movement that refuses to be silenced. In the end, the real-world lesson is both simple and profound. True integrity and the inherent right to speak does not come with the weight of established trophies or the comfort of a familiar stage. It comes from the relentless pursuit of justice, from every stand taken in defense of those whose voices have been relegated to whispers, and from the unwavering belief that every shout for freedom echoes in the hearts of those who are still waiting to be heard. Jasmine Crockett's historic moment serves as both a testament to that belief and a challenge to every institution that has ever deemed itself the custodian of public discourse. Her defiant stance is an enduring reminder that while the silence of the powerful might attempt to muffle dissent, the truth, when spoken with conviction and purpose, will always find its way through, unstoppable and unassailable. As we reflect on this turning point in our shared cultural narrative, one cannot help but acknowledge the seismic shift it represents. A shift that redefines who is allowed to be heard, how that voice is valued, and what it means to truly protect the community. In a world where power is too often measured by superficial markers of success, Jasmine's example cuts through the illusion, laying bare the reality that real strength lies in one's ability to stand up for others, even when it means challenging those who have long occupied the halls of power. It is a lesson that resonates not just as a moment of political theater, but as a clarion call for a more inclusive, just, and equitable society, a call that demands we all reconsider what it means to speak, to listen, and to act in defense of those who matter most. And so, as the debate subsides and the cameras finally fade out, the message remains, etched into the annals of our time. No one can monopolize the truth, and no one's voice should be silenced by the weight of their own accolades. For in the end, the measure of a leader, of a community, and of a society is found not in the pomp of ceremony or the glitter of trophies, but in the unyielding resolve to stand by those who most need to be heard. This is the lesson of that historic night, a lesson of courage, of equality, and of a truth that rings as loudly as any rallying cry. Integrity and justice are the true marks of power, and they belong to every single one of us. As the echoes of that historic confrontation slowly fade into the background, the call to action begins to reverberate, an unmistakable summons for every individual who has ever felt marginalized or silenced. The reverberation of Jasmine Crockett's defiant stand challenges us all. It is time to step off the sidelines and reclaim the narrative from those who would keep us silent. Now more than ever, when injustice stares us down with cold, unyielding eyes, it falls upon us to turn that anger into action. No longer can we allow outdated hierarchies to dictate who may speak and who must remain unheard. Her courage is not meant to be an anomaly. It is a beacon, a rallying cry for every young person, every woman, every person of color, those whose voices have been suppressed by systems built on exclusion and indifference. Let her words not fade into the ether. Let them ignite a movement, a call to petition for reforms that ensure our rights to speak are never compromised. Share her story, discuss her message, and demand accountability from institutions that prioritize appearances over integrity. Now is the moment to mobilize, to gather in communities, to use every available platform to amplify our collective voice. It's time to transform outrage into organized action, to demand from our leaders policies that reflect the diversity and dynamism of our modern society. The battle for the right to be heard is not a solitary one. It is a shared struggle that unites us across generations and political lines. Rise up, join the chorus, and refuse to be silenced by indifference or inertia. Spread the word. Let "Let Her Speak" and Crockett Claps Back be more than hashtags. Let them be the foundation of a renewed commitment to justice and equality. Organize town halls, support voices that dare to defy convention, and hold public figures accountable for perpetuating double standards. Every tweet, every conversation, every peaceful protest is a step toward eradicating the outdated structures that confine us. Now, more than ever, we must embody the spirit of those courageous enough to challenge the status quo, because when silence turns to action, society is transformed forever. The time to speak is now, and the time for change is upon us. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.